I was standing in my kitchen drinking my morning coffee when I saw a construction crew unloading lumber on the back corner of my property. And that's when I knew my day was about to get interesting. My name is Ethan Sanders, and I own 15 acres of wooded land just outside of Boulder, Colorado. I had moved here 3 years ago specifically to get away from people and their endless rules. The property was beautiful, nestled against the Rocky Mountains with a small creek running through it. My house sat about 300 yards from the road, giving me plenty of privacy. Or so I thought. I grabbed my jacket and walked out toward the commotion. There were 4 workers, 2 trucks, and what looked like enough materials to build a decent-sized structure. A middle-aged woman with short blonde hair was standing there with a clipboard, directing the workers like she was orchestrating a symphony. "Excuse me," I called out as I approached. "What exactly is going on here?" The woman turned to me with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, hello. You must be one of the neighbors. I'm Brenda Patterson, president of the Mountain View HOA. We're building a warming hut for the community ski trail that runs through this area." I felt my jaw tighten. "This is my property." Brenda's smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. "Actually, if you check the survey maps, this corner is part of the community easement. It was established when the subdivision was developed in 1987. Lady, I bought this land 3 years ago. There's no subdivision here, and there's definitely no HOA. This is private property, and you're trespassing." She pulled out a folder from her bag and started shuffling through papers. The original developer established the Mountain View HOA to maintain the ski trails and common areas. Your property borders the trail easement, and according to our records, this 10 by 10-foot section is designated for community use. I took the papers from her and scanned them. They were copies of old documents, some dating back to the 80s. The problem was, none of them were part of my property deed. When I bought this land, I had a full survey done, and every inch of those 15 acres belonged to me. "These documents don't mean anything," I said, handing them back. "I have a current survey and a clear title." "You need to pack up and leave." Brenda's friendly demeanor evaporated. "Mr. Sanders, is it? The HOA has a legal right to this easement. We've been maintaining the trails through here for decades. If you interfere with our project, we'll be forced to take legal action." "You do that," I said. "In the meantime, get off my property." One of the construction workers, an older guy with a gray beard, walked over. "Look, buddy, we're just doing our job. The lady hired us to build a shed. We don't want any trouble." "Then I suggest you leave before there is trouble," I replied. Brenda held up her hand. "Gentlemen, continue working. Mr. Sanders, you'll be hearing from our attorney." She pulled out her phone and walked away, already dialing. I stood there watching them work for another minute, then headed back to my house. I wasn't going to get into a physical altercation with construction workers who were just trying to make a living, but I also wasn't going to let this HOA steamroll me. Back inside, I pulled out my property documents and spent the next hour going through every page. My deed was crystal clear. I owned 15 acres and the boundaries were well marked. There was no mention of any easement, no HOA covenants, and no restrictions on my use of the land. I called my real estate attorney, David Chen, who had handled the purchase of my property. His secretary put me through immediately. "Ethan, good to hear from you. What's going on?" I explained the situation, and I could hear him typing on his keyboard as I talked. "I'm looking at your file now," David said. "There's definitely no easement on your property. Let me do some research on this Mountain View HOA. Can you email me copies of the documents they showed you? I didn't keep them, but I can probably get them again. They're still out there building." "They're still building. Ethan, you need to document everything. Take photos, videos, get the construction company's name. If they're building on your property without permission, that's trespassing and potentially criminal mischief. I grabbed my phone and headed back outside. The construction crew had already framed out a small structure, about 10 feet by 10 feet with a peaked roof. It was actually pretty well built, I had to admit. They were working fast. I took several photos and a video, making sure to capture Brenda in the frame as she supervised. She saw me recording and walked over. "Harassing us won't change the law, Mr. Sanders." "I'm documenting the trespassing and destruction of property for my attorney," I replied. "By the way, what's the name of your construction company?" The gray-bearded worker answered before Brenda could stop him. "Peak Construction out of Boulder." "Thanks," I said, making a note in my phone. Brenda's face flushed red. "You're making a big mistake. The HOA has considerable resources, and we don't take kindly to neighbors who won't cooperate with community improvements." "Good thing I'm not part of your community or your HOA," I said. I spent the rest of the afternoon watching them work and documenting everything. By 5 o'clock, they had the basic structure complete: walls, roof, a door, and 2 windows. It was actually a nice little building, the kind of thing you might see at a ski resort for people to warm up and take a break. After they left, I walked over and inspected it. The construction was solid, and they had even poured a small concrete pad for the foundation. This wasn't some thrown-together shed. They had invested real money into this project. That evening, David called me back. "Okay, I've done some digging." Mountain View HOA was established in 1987 by a developer named Richard Morrison. He built a small subdivision of 12 homes about 2 miles from your property. The HOA was supposed to maintain some common areas and a network of trails, including a ski trail that ran through the national forest. My property isn't part of that subdivision. Correct. Your land was never part of Morrison's development. However, there was a separate easement agreement filed in 1989 that gave the HOA access to a trail corridor through several properties in the area, including what is now your land. My heart sank. So they do have an easement, not exactly. The easement agreement was signed by the property owner at the time, a man named Gerald Thompson. But here's the thing. Easements have to be properly maintained and documented to remain valid. I checked, and the last time any maintenance was recorded on that trail section was 1995. In Colorado, an unused easement can be considered abandoned after a certain period. Plus, the easement was specifically for a trail, not for building structures. So what do I do? First thing tomorrow, I'll file for a temporary restraining order to stop any further construction. Then we'll schedule a hearing to determine the validity of the easement. In the meantime, don't touch their building. Let them finish it if they want. It'll actually help our case if they overreach. You want me to just let them keep building on my property? Trust me on this, Ethan. Document everything, but don't interfere. We'll handle this the right way. The next morning, I was surprised to see Brenda return with another crew. This time they were bringing in supplies. A wood stove, firewood, blankets, emergency supplies, even some basic food items. They were stocking the warming hut like it was going to be in regular use. I took more photos and videos, watching as they installed the wood stove with a proper chimney, set up benches inside, and stocked shelves with supplies. Brenda supervised everything with the air of someone who had won a victory. "Nice day, isn't it, Mr. Sanders?" she called out when she saw me. "Wonderful," I replied. "You know, once you calm down and think about it, you'll probably appreciate having this here." The warming hut serves the whole community. People skiing through can stop and rest. It's a valuable amenity. On my property. On the community easement, she corrected. Really, you should be thanking the HOA. We're maintaining this at our expense. A younger woman arrived carrying a large sign. It was professionally made, with the words Mountain View HOA Warming Hut and rules for using the facility. They mounted it on the front of the building. I went back inside and called David. They're putting up signs and everything. Are you sure I shouldn't just tear it down? The restraining order hearing is set for Friday, 3 days from now. Just hold tight. I promise this is going to work out in your favor. Over the next 2 days, Brenda and her crew finished outfitting the warming hut. They brought in more firewood, installed hooks for coats, added a logbook for visitors to sign, and even put up some decorative touches like vintage ski posters. It was fully functional and ready for use. On Thursday afternoon, I saw the first actual users. A couple on cross-country skis came through the trail and stopped at the hut. They went inside, started a fire in the wood stove, and rested for about half an hour. I watched from my kitchen window, feeling my anger build. Friday morning came, and I met David at the Boulder County Courthouse. Brenda was there with her attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit named Marcus Webb. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Flores, reviewed the filings from both sides. The hearing took about 2 hours, with both attorneys presenting documents, surveys, and arguments. Marcus Webb argued that the easement was valid and had been maintained through the HOA's general trail upkeep. He showed photos of the trail being used over the years, though notably none of them were recent or specifically of the section through my property. David presented our survey, the property deed, and evidence that no maintenance had been done on that specific trail section in decades. He also pointed out that even if the easement was valid, it was for a trail, not for building permanent structures. Judge Flores asked Brenda directly, "Mrs. Patterson, when was the last time the HOA performed any maintenance on the trail section that crosses Mr. Sanders' property?" Brenda hesitated. "We maintain all our trails regularly. That's not what I asked, specifically that section. I would have to check our records. Please do." There was a long pause while Marcus Webb whispered with Brenda. Finally, he said, "Your Honor, our records indicate general trail maintenance, but we don't have specific dates for each section." Judge Flores flipped through the documents in front of her. "Mr. Webb, I'm looking at Mr. Sanders' survey from 3 years ago. The surveyor notes that the alleged trail section on his property was completely overgrown and showed no signs of recent use. Does that sound like maintained trail to you?" "Your Honor, with respect, the trail may see seasonal use." "For 30 years, Judge Flores shook her head. "I'm going to rule that the easement, if it ever was valid, has been abandoned through non-use. Furthermore, even if I were to find the easement valid, it was specifically for a walking trail, not for construction of permanent structures. The HOA had no right to build on Mr. Sanders' property." Marcus Webb stood up. "Your Honor, the warming hut serves an important community function. It's a safety feature for people using the trails. Then the HOA should have built it on property they actually own or lease," Judge Flores replied. "My ruling is that Mr. Sanders is the sole owner of the property in question, with no valid easement. The HOA is ordered to remove the structure they built within 30 days. Mr. Sanders, you're also entitled to file for damages if you choose." "Thank you, Your Honor," David said. Outside the courthouse, Brenda was fuming. "This isn't over, we'll appeal." "You do that," I said. "In the meantime, you have 30 days to remove your building." Marcus Webb put a hand on Brenda's shoulder. "Let's discuss this back at the office." That evening, I celebrated with a nice dinner and a better bottle of whiskey than I usually bought. I had won, and the law was on my side. But as I sat on my porch looking out at the warming hut, lit by the setting sun, I started thinking. The HOA had 30 days to remove it, but I had a better idea. The next morning, I called a friend of mine, Jake Morrison, who owned a towing and heavy equipment company. "Jake, how much would it cost to move a small building?" "Depends on the building and where you want to move it." "What are we talking about?" I explained the situation, and Jake laughed so hard I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Man, I love it. I can have my crew out there Monday morning." "Where do you want to put it?" "How about right next to my house? I could use a storage shed." "Even better. I'll give you the friend rate, $1,500, deal." I spent the weekend preparing a new foundation spot near my house, about 50 yards from my back door. It was the perfect location for a storage building, with easy access and good drainage. Monday morning, Jake showed up with his crew and 2 large trucks. One had a hydraulic lift system that could pick up the entire building. It was impressive to watch them work. They disconnected the chimney pipe, secured the structure, and lifted it onto a flatbed. Then they carefully transported it across my property to the new location. By late afternoon, the warming hut was sitting on its new foundation next to my house. Jake and his crew reattached the chimney and made sure everything was level and secure. "All set, Ethan. You've got yourself a nice shed." "Thanks, Jake. I appreciate it." After they left, I spent the rest of the evening reorganizing. All the supplies that Brenda and her HOA had so thoughtfully provided got moved into my garage. The wood stove would be perfect for the building, but I would use it for my own purposes. The benches, the shelves, the decorations, all of it was now mine. Tuesday morning, I was having coffee when I saw Brenda's car racing up my driveway. She slammed on her brakes and jumped out, her face purple with rage. "Where is it? What did you do?" I walked out onto my porch, coffee cup in hand. "Good morning, Brenda. Beautiful day. The warming hut." "It's gone." "Oh, that. Yeah, I moved it." "You what?" "I moved it to a better location. It's right over there." I pointed to where the building now sat next to my house. Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "You can't do that. That's HOA property." "Actually, according to Judge Flores, it's on my property, so it's my property." "You built it without permission, which means you abandoned it. I'm just making use of an abandoned structure." "That's theft." "No, that's property law. You built on my land without permission." "The building became part of my property through attachment. If you don't believe me, call your lawyer." Brenda pulled out her phone and dialed. I could hear her screeching into it even from where I stood. After a few minutes, she held the phone out to me. "Marcus wants to talk to you." I took the phone. "Hello, Mr. Sanders, this is Marcus Webb. What you've done is illegal seizure of property. The warming hut belongs to the HOA, and we invested over $8,000 in its construction." "Mr. Webb, your client built a permanent structure on my property without permission. Under Colorado property law, improvements made to land generally become the property of the landowner, especially when done without consent. You're welcome to file a claim if you disagree, but I think you'll find the law is pretty clear on this." There was silence on the other end. "Let me research this and get back to you." "You do that." "Oh, and by the way, I'm sending the HOA a bill for the use of my property during construction, and for the 3 days their building was here before I moved it. That should partially offset the value of the materials." I handed the phone back to Brenda and went inside, closing the door on her sputtering protests. The next few days were quiet. I figured Brenda and Marcus were scrambling to figure out their legal options. I spent the time converting the warming hut into a proper workshop. I removed the benches and ski posters, installed a workbench, and set up my tools. The wood stove was perfect for keeping the space warm during Colorado winters. On Friday, I received a formal letter from Marcus Webb's office. It was full of legal threats and demands that I return the warming hut or compensate the HOA for its value. The letter claimed the HOA had invested $8,500 in the project and that I was unjustly enriched by keeping it. I forwarded it to David, who called me that afternoon laughing. "Ethan, this is the weakest legal threat I've seen in months. They don't have a leg to stand on. The doctrine they're trying to use doesn't apply when someone builds on your property without permission. So I just ignore it. I'll send them a response. In fact, I'm going to include your bill for property use. How much do you want to charge them? What's reasonable for trespassing, construction activities, and temporary placement of a structure? I'd say $500 per day is more than fair. They were there for 5 days total, so $2,500. Make it happen." David sent the response, and I didn't hear anything for 2 weeks. I assumed the matter was closed and went back to my normal life. I was working from home as a software consultant, which gave me plenty of flexibility and income to maintain my property. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I answered to find an angry man's voice on the other end. "Is this Ethan Sanders? Who's asking?" "This is Robert Patterson, Brenda's husband. You need to return our warming hut immediately or you're going to regret it." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise. We built that hut in good faith for the community and you stole it. Your wife built it on my property without permission after I explicitly told her to leave. If you have a legal issue with the situation, take it up with your attorney. If you continue to harass me, I'll file for a restraining order." "You arrogant piece of," I hung up. 5 minutes later, Brenda called. I let it go to voicemail. She called again and again. After the 4th call, I blocked her number. That evening, I was in my workshop when I heard a car on my driveway. I looked out to see a Boulder County Sheriff's deputy pulling up. I walked out to meet him. "Ethan Sanders, that's me. I'm Deputy Martinez. We received a complaint that you stole property belonging to the Mountain View HOA. Can you tell me your side of the story?" I invited him inside and showed him all the documentation, the court order, the judge's ruling, the letters from the attorneys, everything. Deputy Martinez took his time reading through it all. "So the judge ruled that they had no right to build on your property, correct? And you moved the building after that ruling?" "I did. Since it was on my property and they built it without permission, it became my property." Deputy Martinez nodded slowly. "Well, this is clearly a civil matter, not a criminal one. I'll include this information in my report. I doubt you'll hear anything more from us." "Thanks, Deputy." After he left, I called David and told him what happened. He was annoyed but not surprised. "Brenda is escalating. I'm going to file for a restraining order based on the harassment. Between her husband's threats and her repeated calls, we have grounds. Do what you need to do." The restraining order hearing was set for the following week. In the meantime, I installed security cameras around my property. I had a feeling things were going to get worse before they got better. I was right. 3 days later, around 2 in the morning, I was woken by the sound of breaking glass. I grabbed my phone and checked the security cameras. 2 figures wearing dark clothing and ski masks were throwing rocks through the windows of my workshop. I called 911 immediately and stayed inside my house, watching the cameras. The figures spent about 5 minutes throwing rocks and trying to kick in the door before they gave up and ran off through the woods. Boulder County Sheriff's deputies arrived within 15 minutes. Deputy Martinez was one of them, along with a partner, Deputy Sarah Chen. "Mr. Sanders, are you okay?" "I'm fine. They didn't try to get into my house, just the workshop. I have everything on camera." We watched the footage together. The quality was good enough to see that both suspects were average height, and one appeared to be female based on her build. They had arrived on foot from the direction of the main road. "I think I know who it was," I said. "Brenda Patterson," Deputy Martinez asked. "Her and probably her husband." "We'll definitely want to talk to them, but we need more evidence to make an arrest. Can you send us copies of this footage?" "Absolutely." The next morning, I spent several $100s replacing the broken windows. 6 windows total, all smashed. They had also spray-painted some choice words on the side of the building, calling me a thief and worse. David was furious when I told him. "This has crossed the line into criminal activity. I'm going to push the DA to press charges." The restraining order hearing went forward as scheduled. Brenda showed up with Marcus Webb, looking smug and confident. That changed when David presented evidence of the harassment, the threatening phone call from Robert, the repeated calls from Brenda, and the vandalism. Judge Flores was not happy. "Mrs. Patterson, I ruled on this matter weeks ago. Mr. Sanders is the lawful owner of that property and anything built on it without permission. Why are you continuing to harass him? Your Honor, that warming hut represents a significant investment by our HOA. Mr. Sanders has stolen community property." "No, Mrs. Patterson, you built on his property without permission after being explicitly told not to. Now you've escalated to vandalism and threats. I'm granting the restraining order. You and your husband are to stay at least 500 feet away from Mr. Sanders and his property. Any violation will result in immediate arrest." "But Your Honor, we're done here." Outside the courthouse, Brenda ignored her lawyer's advice and walked right up to me. "This isn't over. That warming hut is community property and you're going to give it back." "You're violating the restraining order that was issued about 2 minutes ago," I said calmly. Deputy Martinez, who had been waiting outside, stepped forward. "Mrs. Patterson, you need to step away now." Brenda finally seemed to realize the situation she was in and backed off, but the look she gave me was pure hatred. Over the next week, things were quiet. Too quiet. I had learned that when dealing with people like Brenda, silence usually meant they were planning something. I was right again. I received a letter from the Boulder County Code Enforcement Office. Someone had filed a complaint that my workshop didn't have proper permits and was in violation of building codes. The letter gave me 30 days to either get retroactive permits or remove the structure. I called the Code Enforcement Office and explained the situation to the inspector, a patient man named Tom Williams. He agreed to come out and take a look. Tom arrived the next day and inspected the workshop thoroughly. He checked the foundation, the walls, the roof, the wood stove installation, everything. When he was done, he shook his head. "Mr. Sanders, this is actually a very well-built structure. The foundation is solid, the framing is professional grade, and even the wood stove installation meets code. Someone knew what they were doing. So what about the permits? Well, normally you would need a building permit for a structure this size. But here's the thing. The HOA built it, not you. They should have pulled permits before construction. Since they didn't, and since they built it illegally on your property, and since you just moved an existing structure, I'm not going to cite you." "Really? Really? However, I am going to cite the Mountain View HOA and Peak Construction for building without permits. That's going to cost them." "How much?" "A few $1,000s in fines, probably. Plus they'll have to get retroactive permits for work they didn't even get to keep." I couldn't help but smile. "Thanks, Tom. No problem. Between you and me, I don't like HOAs that think they can do whatever they want. Rules apply to everyone." 2 days later, I got a panicked call from David. "Ethan, the HOA is suing you in civil court. They're claiming damages of $15,000 for theft and conversion of property." "15,000? I thought they said 8,000. They're adding in emotional distress and punitive damages. It's a nuisance suit, but we'll have to defend it. The civil trial was set for 3 months out. In the meantime, the vandalism investigation continued. Deputies interviewed Brenda and Robert Patterson, but both denied involvement. Without more evidence, the case stalled. Then I got lucky. A neighbor of mine, an older woman named Margaret Hayes who lived about a quarter mile down the road, called me. "Ethan, I heard about the trouble you've been having with the HOA. News travels fast. It's a small community." Anyway, I was going through some footage from my doorbell camera, and I think I caught something interesting. "Can you come take a look?" I drove over immediately. Margaret showed me footage from the night of the vandalism. Her camera faced the road, and it clearly showed Brenda Patterson's car driving past her house at 1:47 a.m., heading toward my property. The same car came back 20 minutes later, driving fast. "Margaret, this is perfect. Can I get a copy of this? Already saved it for you." I never liked that woman. She tried to make me join her HOA a few years back, claiming my property was part of the original development. It wasn't, and I told her to pound sand. I immediately sent the footage to Deputy Martinez. With this evidence placing Brenda at the scene, they had probable cause for an arrest. The next day, deputies picked up both Brenda and Robert Patterson for questioning. Under pressure, Robert cracked and admitted they had vandalized my workshop. He claimed it was Brenda's idea and that he had just gone along with it. Both were arrested and charged with criminal mischief and trespassing. The bail was set at $5,000 each. Marcus Webb called me that afternoon. "Mr. Sanders, my clients made a serious error in judgment. They're willing to drop the civil suit and pay for all damages if you'll agree not to pursue additional charges." "Marcus, I'm not the one pursuing the charges. The district attorney is. This isn't a civil matter anymore. But you could tell the DA you don't want to press forward." "Why would I do that? Your clients vandalized my property and have been harassing me for months. They're not bad people. They just got caught up in protecting what they thought belonged to the community. They built on my property without permission after a judge told them they had no right to be there. Then they destroyed my property when they didn't get their way. That's not protecting the community. That's criminal behavior." Marcus sighed. "What if they paid for all damages, dropped the lawsuit, and made a public apology?" I thought about it. "Add $20,000 for my time and aggravation and we might have a deal." $20,000? That's extortion. "No, that's compensation for months of harassment, legal fees, security cameras, repairs, and the general headache of dealing with your clients. Take it or leave it." There was a long pause. "I'll talk to them." 2 days later, Marcus called back. "They'll agree to $15,000. $20,000, or they can take their chances with the DA and the civil suit I'll file against them." Another pause. "Fine, $20,000, but you have to talk to the DA about dropping the charges." "I'll tell the DA that the matter has been resolved financially and that I'm satisfied, but I'm not going to ask them to drop criminal charges. That's up to them." We drew up a settlement agreement. The Pattersons would pay me $20,000, drop their civil suit, issue a public apology to be published in the local newspaper, and agree to never contact me again. In exchange, I would sign a release of civil liability and tell the DA that I had been compensated for my damages. The settlement was finalized a week later. I received a cashier's check for $20,000, and a formal apology appeared in the Boulder Daily Camera newspaper. It read, "Brenda and Robert Patterson wish to publicly apologize to Ethan Sanders for our actions regarding the warming hut dispute. We built a structure on Mr. Sanders' property without proper permission or legal right. When Mr. Sanders took lawful possession of the structure, we responded inappropriately with harassment and vandalism. We deeply regret our actions and accept full responsibility. We hope Mr. Sanders can accept our apology and move forward. It was satisfying to read, even if I knew it had been written by Marcus Webb and not the Pattersons themselves. The criminal case moved forward despite the settlement. The DA, a tough woman named Lisa Rodriguez, didn't believe in letting people buy their way out of criminal behavior. The Pattersons pled guilty to criminal mischief and trespassing in exchange for probation, community service, and restitution for the damages beyond what I had already received. At the sentencing hearing, Judge Flores addressed them directly. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, you both held positions of responsibility in your community as HOA leaders. Instead of accepting a lawful court ruling, you chose to engage in criminal behavior. You're fortunate that Mr. Sanders wasn't hurt and that the damage was limited to property. I'm sentencing each of you to 2 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and $5,000 in fines. Additionally, you're both prohibited from serving on any HOA board during your probation period. Brenda looked like she wanted to argue, but Marcus put a hand on her arm and kept her quiet. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse feeling genuinely relieved. The whole ordeal had taken almost 6 months from start to finish, but it was finally over. I spent the next few weeks enjoying my property in peace. The workshop that had caused so much trouble became my favorite place to spend time. I used it for woodworking projects, and the wood stove kept it cozy during the cold Colorado evenings. Margaret Hayes invited me over for dinner one evening and we became friends. She told me stories about the area, including how the Mountain View HOA had tried to expand its authority over the years, usually unsuccessfully. They started with 12 homes, she said. Now they're down to 8. 4 of the original homeowners got so fed up with Brenda's nonsense that they left. The ones who stayed are either true believers or too stubborn to move. What do you think will happen to the HOA now? Oh, it'll probably fall apart. Brenda was the driving force behind everything. Without her as president, I doubt anyone else wants to deal with the headaches. Margaret was right. Within 2 months, I heard through the grapevine that the Mountain View HOA had voted to dissolve. The remaining members would each maintain their own properties, and the common areas would be deeded to the county as public trails. The ski trail that ran near my property was technically on National Forest land, not my property, despite the Pattersons' claims. The Forest Service maintained it occasionally, and I actually didn't mind people using it as long as they stayed on the trail and didn't trespass. One Saturday morning, I was working in my shop when I heard a knock on my door. I tensed, worried it might be more HOA trouble, but when I opened it, I found a young couple in their 30s with 2 kids. "Hi, are you Ethan Sanders?" the man asked. "I am. I'm Chris Wu, and this is my wife Alicia. We read about the HOA situation in the paper. We actually used to stop at that warming hut when we'd ski through here. We wanted to apologize if we were ever trespassing." "You didn't know," I said. "The HOA put up signs saying it was community property. Still, we're sorry for any inconvenience. The kids loved stopping there to warm up." I looked at the 2 children, probably 6 and 8 years old, bundled up in their ski gear. They looked cold. "You know what? Come on in. I'll make some hot chocolate." They hesitated, but I waved them inside. My house was warm and comfortable, with a big living room that had a view of the mountains. "This is beautiful," Alicia said. "Thanks. I moved here to get away from the city and all the noise." "Mission accomplished," Chris laughed. We spent an hour talking while the kids played with my dog, a golden retriever named Cooper that I had gotten a few months earlier. They told me about living in Boulder and bringing their kids out to ski the trails every winter. "You miss having the warming hut?" I asked. Honestly. "It was convenient, but it's not essential. There are other places to warm up along the trail system. We're just glad the trails are staying open." After they left, I kept thinking about that conversation. The warming hut had never been about safety or community. It had been about Brenda Patterson wanting to expand the HOA's footprint and authority. The people who actually used the trails didn't seem to care that much. Spring arrived in Colorado with its typical mix of sunshine and late snow. I spent my days working on consulting projects and my evenings fixing up my property. The workshop became a gym, a wood shop, and a general hangout space. I installed better lighting, insulated it properly, and even added a small bathroom. The whole situation had cost me time, stress, and probably $10,000 in legal fees even after the settlement. But it had also taught me important lessons about standing up for yourself and not letting bullies push you around, even when they hide behind official-sounding organizations like HOAs. David Chen became a good friend through the process. We'd meet for beers occasionally and laugh about the whole situation. "You know, Ethan, you could have just let them keep the warming hut on the corner of your property. It probably wouldn't have bothered you that much." "Maybe," I admitted, "but it wasn't about the hut. It was about someone thinking they could just do whatever they wanted on my property. If I'd let that slide, what would have been next? A parking lot, a picnic area, a whole resort." Fair point. And honestly, watching Brenda's face when she realized you'd moved the building was worth the price of admission. I had to laugh at that. Deputy Martinez, who had also become friendly over the course of the investigation, told me later that Brenda had filed a complaint claiming I had violated the restraining order by stealing her building. The department had explained to her, yet again, that it was my building on my property and that she needed to stop. Summer brought tourists to Colorado, and occasionally I'd see hikers or bikers on the national forest trails near my property. Most people were respectful and stayed on the marked paths. Once in a while, someone would wander onto my land, but a polite reminder was usually enough to redirect them. In August, I got an unexpected letter from Peak Construction, the company that had built the warming hut. It was from the owner, apologizing for building on my property without verifying the HOA's claims. "We typically trust our clients to have proper permissions and permits," he wrote. "In this case, we failed to do our due diligence. We're glad to hear the structure is being put to good use, and we hope there are no hard feelings." I wrote back, thanking him for the apology and complimenting the quality of the construction. It wasn't the company's fault that Brenda had lied to them. Fall arrived with its spectacular display of golden aspens against evergreen pines. I had lived in Colorado for almost 4 years now, and I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. The peace and beauty of my property made every bit of the HOA drama worthwhile. One October evening, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when I saw Margaret walking up my driveway. She had a basket with her. "Evening, Ethan. I baked too many muffins and thought you might like some." "Margaret, you're the best. Come sit down." We sat together watching the light fade over the mountains. After a while, she said, "You know, when you first moved here, I worried you'd be another one of those city people who'd complain about everything. The bugs, the wildlife, the weather, the distance from everything. What changed your mind? The way you handled Brenda. You didn't back down, but you didn't stoop to her level either. You used the law and did things the right way. That takes character. I just didn't want someone pushing me around. It was more than that. You could have made things ugly. You could have destroyed that building out of spite. Instead, you moved it and turned it into something useful. That showed real class. I felt myself getting a bit emotional. Thanks, Margaret. That means a lot. We sat in comfortable silence for a while longer before she headed home. After she left, I walked over to my workshop and looked at it with fresh eyes. It really was a great building, solid and well made. The HOA had spent over $8,000 on materials and construction. They had installed good windows, a quality door, proper insulation, and a certified wood stove. If Brenda had just asked permission, if she had approached me respectfully and explained what they wanted to do, I probably would have said yes. A small, warming hut on the corner of my property wouldn't have bothered me. I might have even helped maintain it, but she hadn't asked. She had assumed she had the right to do whatever she wanted, and when I objected, she had doubled down rather than admit she was wrong. That pride and stubbornness had cost her HOA thousands of dollars, resulted in criminal charges, and ultimately led to the dissolution of the organization she had spent years building. There was a lesson in that, I thought. Power, even the small-time power of an HOA presidency, can corrupt people. It can make them think they're above the rules that apply to everyone else. Winter came again, and I spent cozy evenings in my workshop reading, building things, and occasionally hosting friends. The wood stove kept the space warm and comfortable even when temperatures dropped below zero. One snowy Saturday, I heard someone knocking on my workshop door. I opened it to find an elderly man in cross-country ski gear. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said. "I'm a bit turned around. Is this the way back to the El Dorado Trail?" "You're about a quarter-mile off course," I said. "Come in and warm up. I'll draw you a map." His name was Richard Morrison, and yes, he was the same developer who had created the Mountain View subdivision back in the 80s. He was in his 70s now, still skiing regularly. "I heard about the trouble with the warming hut," he said after I made him some coffee. "I'm sorry about that. When I created that HOA, it was meant to be a simple organization to maintain the common areas in the subdivision. It was never supposed to extend beyond those 12 properties." What happened? Brenda Patterson happened. She bought one of the houses about 10 years ago and immediately got involved with the HOA. Within 2 years, she was president. She had all these grand ideas about expanding the community, bringing in more properties, building amenities. Most of us just wanted to maintain our own homes and be left alone. So the whole easement thing was wishful thinking on her part. That easement agreement from 1989 was for a trail corridor, and it expired after 10 years of non-use. I tried to tell her that, but she wouldn't listen. She was convinced she could rebuild my original vision into something bigger. Instead, she destroyed it. Richard nodded sadly. The HOA dissolving was probably for the best. The remaining homeowners can manage their own properties without the drama, but it's sad to see something end that way. Before he left, I showed him around the workshop. He smiled when he saw how well maintained it was. You know, if Brenda had spent half as much energy on actual community building instead of empire building, she could have created something really special. This hut on the right property with the right permissions could have been a wonderful community amenity. "Do you want it?" I asked suddenly. "I mean, if there's a good location for it on the National Forest land with proper permits, I'd be willing to donate it." Richard looked surprised. "Really?" "Sure. I use it now, but honestly, I could build another shop if I needed to. If it could actually serve the purpose it was meant for in the right place, that might be a good ending to this whole story. Let me make some calls." Over the next few months, Richard worked with the Forest Service to identify a good location for the warming hut. They found a spot about 5 miles away on a popular section of trail that didn't have any nearby amenities. The Forest Service agreed to accept the building as a donation and maintain it. In April, Jake Morrison and his crew moved the building again, this time to its new permanent home on Forest Service land. The agency added proper permits, installed a gravel parking area, and put up official signs. The warming hut opened to the public in May with a small dedication ceremony. I attended, along with Margaret, Richard, and about 30 other people from the community. The Forest Service ranger giving the dedication speech mentioned the complex history of the building, but focused on how it would now serve the public good. After the ceremony, several people came up to thank me for donating the building. I didn't mention that it had been built on my property without permission or any of the drama that followed. That was in the past. Chris and Alicia Wu were there with their kids. "This is perfect," Alicia said. "The location is so much better than where it was before. More people can use it, and it's on public land where it belongs." "I'm glad it worked out," I said. As I drove home that evening, I felt a sense of completion. The warming hut was finally where it should have been from the start. The HOA was dissolved, but the community wasn't gone. The people who actually cared about these trails had something useful, and I had my property and peace back. I never saw Brenda Patterson again. I heard she and Robert moved to Arizona, probably looking for a fresh start away from the embarrassment of their criminal conviction and the newspaper articles about the case. The workshop spot next to my house became a garden. I planted vegetables and flowers, and Cooper loved lounging in the sunny patches between the rows. Without the building there, I had a better view of the mountains from my kitchen window. Life returned to the quiet rhythm I had moved to Colorado for. I worked on my consulting projects, maintained my property, and enjoyed the natural beauty around me. Margaret and I became close friends, often having dinner together and sharing stories. Sometimes on winter evenings, I'd cross-country ski out to the warming hut in its new location. I'd go inside, start a fire in the wood stove I had helped install, and sit on the benches I had once claimed as my own. It was satisfying to see the building being used as intended, full of happy people taking a break from their outdoor adventures. The whole experience had taught me valuable lessons about property rights, standing up to bullies, and the importance of doing things the right way. It had also shown me that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's taking something negative and turning it into something positive. My 15 acres of land remained my sanctuary, and I guarded it carefully. But I also learned to be a good neighbor, to share when appropriate, and to find solutions that worked for everyone. The irony wasn't lost on me that Brenda Patterson's aggressive attempt to force community property onto my land had ended with me freely donating that same building for actual community use. If she had just asked nicely, been honest, and worked within the law, she could have achieved her goal. Instead, her arrogance and illegal behavior had cost her everything. Sometimes I'd laugh thinking about her face when she discovered the warming hut missing from my property corner. The shock and fury must have been something. But then I'd remember that her actions had led to criminal charges and public humiliation, and I'd feel a bit of sympathy. Not much, but a bit. Life moved on. I dated occasionally, traveled when the mood struck, and continued to build my consulting business. The workshop drama became a funny story to tell at parties, though I usually downplayed my role and emphasized the absurdity of the situation. Cooper grew older and lazier, content to spend his days sleeping in sunny spots and going for evening walks around the property. He had been a puppy during the HOA troubles, and now he was a mature dog who helped keep me grounded. Margaret celebrated her 80th birthday with a big party at her house. Half the neighborhood showed up, and I met dozens of people who had their own HOA horror stories. It seemed like Brenda and the Mountain View HOA had rubbed many people the wrong way over the years. To Ethan, Margaret said during her toast, who had the courage to stand up to the worst HOA president in Colorado history and turned a problem into a solution. Everyone cheered, and I felt my face turn red. But I raised my glass and accepted the praise. The abandoned Mountain View subdivision houses slowly found new owners. Without HOA fees and restrictions, the properties became more attractive. New families moved in, fixed up the homes, and created their own informal community without the drama and rules. Richard Morrison skied past my property occasionally, always stopping to chat if I was outside. We became friends despite our age difference, bonded by our mutual dislike of overreaching HOAs and love of Colorado's natural beauty. "You know," he told me one spring day, "I've been developing properties for 50 years. The worst decision I ever made was creating that HOA. I thought it would help maintain property values and create community. Instead, it became a vehicle for petty tyrants like Brenda to exercise power over their neighbors." "Not all HOAs are bad," I said. "No, but enough of them are that I'd never buy a property with one again. Give me land like yours, no restrictions, no busybodies telling me what color I can paint my fence." I couldn't argue with that sentiment. Years passed, and the story of the warming hut became local legend. New residents would hear about it and ask me questions. I'd tell them the basics, but try not to dwell on it. Life was too short to spend rehashing old conflicts. The warming hut itself became a beloved community fixture. The Forest Service maintained it well, and it served thousands of visitors every year. Someone even wrote an article about it for a regional outdoor magazine, calling it a symbol of community cooperation and public service. I kept a copy of that article, finding it funny that the building's controversial origins had been completely forgotten in favor of a feel-good narrative about community spirit. My property remained my haven. The 15 acres gave me room to breathe, space to think, and freedom to live life on my own terms. I never regretted standing up to Brenda and the HOA, even though it had been stressful and expensive. In a weird way, I was grateful for the experience. It had taught me about property law, the legal system, and my own capacity to handle conflict. It had also introduced me to good people like David Chen, Margaret Hayes, and Deputy Martinez. Sometimes the best things in life come from overcoming challenges. The warming hut situation had been a challenge, and I had overcome it with integrity and patience. The resolution had been better than anything I could have planned. The building served the public, my property was protected, and justice had been served. As I sat on my porch on a cool autumn evening, Cooper at my feet and a glass of whiskey in my hand, I looked out over my land and felt complete satisfaction. This was my place, my peace, my home. No HOA could take that away from me. And somewhere out there on a Forest Service trail, in a building that had caused so much trouble, people were warming up and enjoying the outdoors. That was a good ending to a complicated story. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Another day in paradise, another day of freedom, another day of living life exactly as I chose. That's what property ownership really meant, and that's what I had fought to protect. The warming hut was gone from my property, but the lesson remained. Stand up for your rights, follow the law, and never let bullies push you around. It was a lesson worth learning, even if the tuition had been steep.